And I found that somewhat interesting because there was, in contrast to uh, a study done by Menlo Ventures, which is a venture capitalist firm, which I think may be one of the deepest surveys or studies on the state of Gen AI within the enterprise that I've seen. Um, we can't go through all of it. There's a ton of data, but the biggest thing is just how much spending we're seeing. So according to them, they're seeing $13.8 billion in spend on AI in the enterprise. That's a staggering number, a six times growth from last year. You want to know why NVIDIA selling so many chips? Because there's a massive workload play here. Yet a third of the people that they talk to, and they have similar data here as far as the CEOs and executives saying this is going to be going crazy, that they don't, a third don't have a vision for what the heck they're going to do with this technology.
Hmm.
So just sort of all over the place, and we can dive into some of the other details because I think they have some really interesting things about how people are budgeting and where they're spending money in the use cases. But I think we're seeing this picture sort of really evolve where there is this is definitely not a rising tide that floats all boats. It's like you either get this right and see value, or you don't and you crash and burn. And it's difficult because you also have this executive layer that are just 100% in, like they're fully bullish on this and not really connected to the reality.
Yeah, one of the questions that I get most often on the FinOps side is from IT people asking genuinely confusedly, like, where is this money coming from? And uh, so there's definitely a haves and haves nots because not everybody is pushing a ton of money into generative AI. For a lot of enterprises, this is still experimental, and the Menlo Park so Menlo Ventures study represents that with saying that 60% of these investments are coming from experimental budgets in the early stages, and only 40% from more permanent or budgeted uh, sources. So the majority of AI not coming from formally budgeted and sources in your organization. There's a lot of experiments and a lot of executive. How do we do this? And let's try this out a one time, and going on right now.
But just a little quick point on that. That's actually a shift because last year most of that money was coming from these set aside budgets. And this is backed up with CIOs that I'm talking to, where increasingly they're now drawing this from operational budgets.
Mhm.
And in that same report, 58% of it was coming from existing allocations, meaning this is displaced money. This is money being taken from other places in some cases now. So I
Mhm.
think it was that to me is quite telling of how the shift is occurring. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. Um, I also just found it interesting, like you said, how there's a number of use cases that were described in detail because most of these studies basically just ask whether you're ready for Gen AI or not and just leave it there rather than digging into the actual business use cases. And frankly, that is where the return on investment that we blather on about day in and day out is actually going to come from the ability to actually accelerate business processes at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that it went into these specific use cases. And in case you're wondering, I won't go through all of them, but the top five, I think it was, let me just read it through. The top handful: code generation, support chatbots, enterprise search and retrieval, data extraction and transformation, and meeting summarization. So those five represented a huge chunk of it. With I don't know what these numbers actually represent. So 51% of the survey are using them in code generation, down to meeting summarization 25%. The meeting summarization one is actually a little surprising to me that it's that low because that
Mm-hmm.
is such a low hanging fruit and is built into so many things. But in either case, um, what I think is interesting is code gen is something that's got a lot of traction. It's an obvious sort of place for it, so that makes sense. Meaning summarization, like we said, I expected the number to be higher. The three in the middle are to me quite fascinating because they're the I don't want to say code generation isn't real because there's a very direct, but it's also narrow. Um, these other three are big. right? When we start talking about data extraction and transformation, enterprise search and support, these are big use cases. And so, when we look at where this is all going, I think you can expect that those are going to sort of explode
Mhm.
as it goes. The other big thing, and I'm really curious of your take on this one because I'm starting to formulate a very definitive opinion on this. Is it talked about the build versus buy, which the report showed something that I expected to be in reversed. That it's saying that right now, 47% of solutions are developed in house and 53% are sourced from vendors. And the surprise is that in 2023 it was the opposite, or not the opposite, but it was 80% sourced, meaning there's an increased prevalence of building these AI solutions.
Mhm.
Um, and going back to our conversation about Agent Force and what Microsoft just released in this sort of in this middle ground, that was surprising a little bit. But like I said, I have my opinions on it. I'm curious how you reacted to that.
Yeah, my gut feel says that open source AI is pushing back. Last year, we thought basically we had to work with Chat GPT or bust, maybe Claude, but basically we had to work with these out of the box models, and then at best perhaps do some retrieval augmented generation, and then kind of call it a day and hope that the data that we pulled into a large foundational model was good enough. We're starting to see there's additional room to both use these open source models, but also we've been seeing smaller models come out from the likes of Databricks and IBM that are more malleable and easier to train. And we're seeing that small language models are gaining traction as well for specific use cases. And I also think this also uh, uh, as partially related to previous investments in data science and machine learning, and that these data scientists who had been kind of given up on last year have kind of got their groove back again and figured out how they can actually work with existing generative AI tools and continue to experiment and build.
Well, so my opinionated view of this is what I think we're seeing is something that I've advocated for broadly within the IT space for
Mhm,
almost a decade now, and that is that you buy what is commoditized, what doesn't provide any competitive value, i.e., meeting summarization,
mhm.
code build, probably, right? And you build those things that actually provide competitive value in the market. And I think that's what this to me is indicative of, is that we're seeing a shift now where there's enough experimentation that's gone on. People have gotten comfortable enough that they're starting to explore. And again, it backs up with conversations I've been having with CIOs recently.
Mhm.
That they're looking for those opportunities where they can apply AI technology in a way that actually provides some sort of competitive differentiation. And those use cases they're building for. And so I think it's going to be this really interesting. Now, the question is, where does that balance point is that half and half, or what that ends up looking like? I think we may be seeing some cost pushback where they're questioning, can can we go and take an open source LLM and build our own, you know, commoditized sort of version. Um, I think those folks though are going to get a rude awakening. I think that they're going to quickly find that that's a poor use of resources. I read this other article which I didn't share, but basically just blasting these CIOs that think they can go develop their own even RAG implementations, let alone model development, that it requires all these resources when you can just go buy it off the shelf and solve your problems and get the value out of it. And so I think it's going to be this sort of interesting balance point that enterprises are going to be continuing to struggle to find the right point for them.
Yeah, I do think that model testing is very compute intensive right now, but part of that is that we're very bad at it, frankly, overall, and that we are throwing a bunch of crap into the testing process that will probably get rationalized more as we get more used to working with AI. I don't think it needs to necessarily be break your bank to test models as long as we are able to test the parts of the model that are most relevant to our use cases. But I don't think, but right now we're just running the full model through every possible example that we can think of. And that's really not the most effective way to do this.
And it's still not working, as we'll talk about when we close the show.
Yep.